Now, there are certain other important points which one really needs to know in respect of loss from profits and gains of business and profession. Now, I told you earlier that the carry forward and set off in case of PGBP is allowed only for 8 assessment years. However, there are certain exceptions which are provided under the Income Tax Act, and these are dealt with in details in separate parts of the presentation, but just for the sake of completeness, let me complete them. Now, normally the profits and gains of business and profession are incurred by one assessee. Let's say X. Therefore, the set-off should ideally be allowed to the same assessee himself. I mean, if I purchase the business, ideally in case of companies, especially the closely held companies, there are provision of section 79 which says that you will not be allowed to be carried forward the business loss, and that's the rule. But in the following cases which are discussed here, the carry forward of losses is allowed to be taken forward by the other assessee who may take over the business subject to certain conditions which are separately discussed. The first one is amalgamation. So amalgamation basically refers to a situation when, let's say, there were two companies A and B and they merged together under a court process. So in amalgamation, the losses of one company are allowed to be carried forward by the other company. Of course, there are conditions that as to what kind of a business it should be, how the business should be carried forward, and all those things. The second is the case of a demerger. Again, in case of demerger also, the transferee company is allowed to carry forward the losses incurred by the main company. Inheritance. So suppose a person expires and the business is carried forward by his successors. Then also the losses are allowed to be carried forward even though the business is not carried forward by the same assessee. And the last one is conversion of partnership firm proprietary concern into company. Okay. The second exception comes from the fact that the losses are allowed to be carried forward for 8 years. However, in case of section 33B kinds of businesses, now just to give you a brief into this, section 33B basically refers to cases where the businesses are discontinued because of certain natural calamities. So in case of those businesses, if there are any losses which were discontinued and subsequently the assessee earns certain specified income, then this 8-year exception does not apply. Now, one of the other points which is very important in case of profits and gains of business and profession is that to claim this set-off of losses, the return should be filed under section 139 subsection 3. Otherwise, the carry forward is not allowed. This section we have discussed separately in terms of the filing of return and assessment procedure stuff. You can refer to the details in that part. I'm not doing it again for the sake of repetition.